So we have a very interesting session ahead of us, and we have two very eminent cardiologists who are joining us today. So I'm going to first introduce Dr. Vanita Arora. Now, Dr. Vanita Arora is a pioneer female cardiac electrophysiologist who has earned several accolades, including Female Doctor Entrepreneur of the Year 2018, Chikitsa Ratan, and several other outstanding achievements in her medical career spanning more than 2 decades. She's currently a senior consultant cardiac electrophysiologist and interventional cardiologist at Apollo Hospital, Delhi. Dr. Arora has been a distinguished faculty member of several national and international meetings, such as the Heart Rhythm Society and the Asia Pacific Heart Rhythm Society. She has also been elected as Secretary of the Indian Heart Rhythm Society. Dr. Arora has presented over 50 papers in national and international seminars and conferences. And today she's going to be talking on the conduction system pacing. Our second eminent guest is Dr. Vivek Kumar, who's a consultant electrophysiologist and interventional cardiologist at Indraprastha Apollo Hospital, New Delhi. He has done international preceptorship in transcatheter aortic valve implantation from Cleveland Clinics in the US. Has published and peer-reviewed multiple papers in reputed international and national journals, and was awarded the Best Electrophysiology Case Award in the Cardiac Rhythm Council 2021. He has a rich experience in complex coronary interventions and arrhythmia care, and has presented complex cases in national as well as international conferences. He is going to be presenting a structural heart intervention, the current scenario, and the future. So without any further ado, over to you, Dr. Vanita Arora.
Thank you, Dr. Anupama, for the kind introduction. Good evening, everybody. It's a proud privilege for me to be part of this group today. And I thank Dr. Chauhan for giving this opportunity, and I thank you all for joining us here. My topic for today is actually about conduction system pacing. And I want to say that the era has begun. Just to give you a brief overview of what conduction system pacing is all about, I have made this presentation into scenarios, and I will try to convince that RV pacing, the regular pacing that we have been doing till date, it has become an ancient history, and whoever is not venturing into physiological pacing is actually not doing the right job. Conduction system pacing, physiological pacing, his bundle pacing, left bundle pacing. These are all synonymous to each other, and we should take them as they are and understand what we are talking about when we are talking of either conduction system pacing or physiological pacing, whenever you hear that. Now, when we were doing conventional RV pacing, the one lead used to go into the right atrium, the other used to go into the right ventricle. There was always an asynchronous cardiac contraction from the RV pacing, leading on to negative inotropy, and there were a lot of structural changes which were occurring in the LV. At a later stage, the patients will present to us either with atrial fibrillation, increased incidence of that, increased incidence of heart failure, or even the risk of mortality. Now, many of you have seen such kind of ECGs, the RV-paced ECG, wide QRS. Patient is pacing very well. He or she is not having symptoms of syncope. But look at the QRS. The QRS is so wide. Now, and when you do the echo, you do the strain pattern, there was marked dysynchrony in the left ventricle that was seen because of the RV apical pacing. Now, what exactly happens? This cartoon shows that. Please see this carefully. This is the depolarization of the atrium which is occurring. And from the RV apex, this is the lead in the RV apex. The depolarization wave is actually going from the apex to the base, which is the reverse form of conduction system depolarization which is occurring. It is absolutely opposite. Normally, conduction system would do the depolarization from the base to the apex. So this is what is happening. This is what happened. And so we started looking for alternatives for RV pacing. Instead of putting it at the apex, we started putting it at the septum, mid-septum, high septum, even in the right ventricular outflow tract. So the results were the same and we did not have any benefit. Then came in the era of biweek pacing. We said cardiac resynchronization therapy actually resynchronizes the dyssynchrony which is present in the LV. And in patients who have LV function less than 35%, in wide QRS, left bundle branch block patients, this form of pacing did very well along with the device therapy, ICD therapy, wherever it was indicated. But what about patients who have normal or the low ejection, near normal ejection fraction? Well, what happens in biweek pacing, this cartoon shows that. You see, we have placed one lead in the RV, one lead in the LV. The depolarization is occurring, but if you see, the depolarization is still occurring in the opposite direction, and in the LV, the depolarization is actually occurring from the epicardium to endocardium. While in the normal heart, the conduction occurs from the endocardium to the epicardium. Then came in the His bundle pacing. The concept was very good, and we were supposed to implant the pacing lead actually in the His bundle of the AV conduction system, and it would lead on to normalization of the biventricular activation. And we were looking at not only the prevention of adverse clinical outcome, but reversal of adverse clinical outcomes also. This is how we place the lead. Diagram to show. This is the conventional RA-RV pacing that we used to do earlier. Now the RV lead actually goes into the His bundle. What about the His bundle? Where do we find the His bundle? Well, the anatomy of the His bundle, this diagram explains it. The His bundle is a structure, it is a 2 millimeter structure in the membranous portion of the intraventricular septum, which is actually in the right atrium. One can have to cross the tricuspid valve. This part of the His bundle is in the right atrium. If we can capture from there, we don't need to cross the tricuspid valve. But then the His bundle continues. It is surrounded by the fibrous tissue. It continues into the myocardium, inside the muscular septum, and divides into right and left bundle. And if we have to do the left bundle pacing, we cross the tricuspid annulus and we place our lead on the left bundle. So this is how the anatomy of the His bundle looks like. Dr. Deshmukh, a proud Indian, was the first person to do this pacing, this kind of pacing, and that was in the year 2000, where Dr. Deshmukh, he placed the lead at the His bundle and did the ablation, because the patient was a case of tachycardia syndrome with atrial fibrillation with fast ventricular rate. So the ablation of the AV node was done along with, and this lead was placed at the His bundle. This was the first case published in 2000. Now what happens in His bundle? This cartoon explains it very well. You see that depolarization is occurring in the atria, it goes to the ventricle, and through the normal conduction system, the depolarization wave travels from the apex to the base, and it is all endocardial. It is not epicardial to endocardial. Giving you some examples, this patient is 71-year-old male with a long PR interval, which signifies the AV nodal disease. Now the QRS is narrow, but look at the PR interval. The PR interval is so long. It is almost equivalent to 10 small squares. We have done the His bundle pacing and look at the resultant QRS. It is a beautiful, narrow, normal QRS which has resulted from the His bundle pacing. Another example of a 69-year-old patient who presented with giddiness and was also diagnosed as sleep apnea syndrome. Look at the patient once he was admitted. It was a narrow QRS with PR prolongation, but then intermittently going into 2:1 and then a complete heart block with a wide QRS escape rhythm. And this is once the pacing was done, the His bundle pacing was done, the QRS was 80 milliseconds, which means narrow QRS. It's a beautiful narrow QRS. I'll present another very, very interesting case of, this is the father of a nurse. This patient had a history of paroxysmal AFib, hypertension, and was diagnosed as tachycardia syndrome, given a dual chamber pacemaker in 2017 outside. So, in the follow-up device check, it was found that patient was pacing the right ventricle also almost 90% of the time. This is the data of the patient. At the time of implant, patient's ejection fraction was normal. Patient had some episodes of atrial fibrillation, and the burden of RV pacing since the first follow-up was almost 89-90%. Now, after 6 to 8 months, what happened, and after 1 year, what happened was that patient's ejection fraction dropped from 60% to 40%. AFib incidence increased, and RV pacing dependence also increased. Now, what do we do in such patients? When we see the ECG, this is such a wide QRS, it's almost 200 milliseconds. Patient is pacing well, but patient is symptomatic. Atrial fibrillation and ejection fraction is dropping within a year. And this is the underlying ECG. It's a narrow QRS. The PR is prolonged. Intermittently, patient goes into sinus pauses, and the AV conduction disease is also there, but the QRS is narrow. So what do? What we did here was we removed the RV lead and we put in the lead at the His bundle. This is the lead which was put at the His bundle. In both the views, you can see the RA lead is the same. With the same dual chamber pacemaker, we placed the lead at the His bundle. And look at this, paced QRS was beautifully narrow. And this is just similar to the QRS which was at the baseline. And what happened? Look at the clinical course of the patient. In this case, this was a referred case, so AFib ablation was performed for the recurrent episodes of atrial fibrillation in this patient. And then at 14 months, we performed the revised RV lead. We revised it with the His bundle position and see how the ejection fraction of the patient came back to normal. So these are the examples of the patient, how they are helped with conduction system pacing, and they should be given the benefit of that. What about the role of His bundle pacing for cardiac resynchronization patients? Now, there can be patients of non-ischemic cardiomyopathy with left bundle branch block. You see them so often. You refer such patients for CRT therapy. But these can be taken care with the dual chamber pacing also. You can pace the left bundle and convert this QRS into narrow QRS and improve the ejection fraction, which is seen here in the echo tracings of the patient. Look at the ejection EF of the patient, the echo finding that this is after almost 6 months of left bundle pacing of these patients. So there is not only objective but subjective evidence also that this helps. This is an example of another patient with left bundle branch block. We were not able to cannulate the coronary sinus. Now patient had two options: either undergo a surgical implant of the lead, you open the chest and you put in a lead, epicardial lead for LV pacing, or you do the left bundle branch block pacing, converting this wide QRS into a narrow QRS. This is how the left bundle pacing lead looks like, and this is where this lead is placed at the His bundle, while the other lead is in the left bundle. You can see the die shows you the spectrum of this. This is the septum of the patient in which we have placed the left bundle lead. This is the lead we place at the His bundle. So look at the difference between the two leads, the distance difference, and we get a good outcome with the left bundle pacing. This is the left bundle potential we have measured on the EP system. Now, what about the right bundle patients? Just a word about the right bundle patients. Most of the times when these patients present to us with this kind of an ECG, the right bundle branch block, QRS is around 146 milliseconds. Patient has LV dysfunction. Ejection fraction is less than 35%. We normally used to keep these patients on medical therapy with no benefit of CRT. But with the His bundle pacing, we can actually convert these QRS into normal. The His bundle pacing has become a modality which can help many of these patients also who were actually not treated with pacing at all, like right bundle, like intraventricular conduction defect. So this is a very promising therapy. And we do not have randomized controlled trials. They are coming, they are on the way, they are being done. But despite that, not having randomized controlled trial, because of the results of His bundle conduction system pacing, they have gained their guidelines in the ACC AHA HRS guidelines in 2018. That if you have ejection fraction between 36 to 50% and you require RV pacing for more than 40% of the time, you can either select CRT or you can have His bundle pacing. And in patients who are having an AV block, you require them to upgrade or you need to change the device, you can actually upgrade them to His bundle pacing. It can be considered. Hence, RV pacing is associated with certain adverse clinical outcomes. We have been searching for an alternative site, and induction system pacing becomes a very promising therapy and is being done all over the world now. Most of the people who are doing induction system pacing in US are actually Indians, proud Indians, and we are also doing it very, very regularly now. You should consider these for your patients. And you were used to seeing the wide QRS earlier, but now you see narrow QRS, and that is what is promising in this therapy. Thank you so much for your patient hearing.
Thank you, Dr. Vanitha. Are we going to take questions at the end of the session?
In the end, Dr. Anupama.
All right. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Vivek Kumar to please go ahead with his topic. And his topic for today is structural heart intervention, current scenario and the future.
You have to unmute yourself, Vivek.
Sorry, I just forgot. So I was just saying thank you very much, Dr. Anupama, for your generous introduction, and Dr. Chauhan and the Physician Forum for this opportunity to present our work and discuss on these very interesting topics. So without wasting any time, let me start my presentation. So I'm going to talk about percutaneous valve interventions, current scenario and future. So before we go to future, we must just dwell upon what was there in the history and what is the current scenario. So if you see historically, structural heart intervention is nothing new. In the pediatric group, in the congenital heart disease, we have ASD devices being done, VSD devices, PTA devices being done. And very recently, PTA statins are also being done for drug-dependent cyanotic heart diseases. And regarding valves, if you see that in congenital patient heart diseases, like for bicuspid aortic valve with aortic stenosis, balloon aortic valvoplasty and balloon pulmonary valvoplasty for severe PS is a known and a very established therapy. But for adult population and adult heart diseases, we didn't have much options regarding aortic stenosis. And regarding mitral valve intervention, if you see, BMV, as we know, the percutaneous transvenous mitral thrombectomy, if you ask me, I think is the most common valvular heart intervention being done in India by intervention cardiologists. And this is, you can see an example where you go through a transcatheter access, you cross the valve with a Inao balloon, and then you dilate the valve. And this was the pre-BMV end diastolic gradient, and you see the gradient disappearing. So this was the most gratifying valvular intervention if you ask for any intervention cardiologist. So this is the history that we have. So what's the current scenario and what's happening to you that's really making us very excited and optimistic? We are getting a foothold into a new realm where only the cardiac surgeons used to work on. So what are the valves and what's the unmet need, if you see? So for aortic valve disease, the acquired valve diseases of aortic valve in form of aortic stenosis or maybe aortic regurgitation, mitral valve diseases, degenerative mitral valve disease, mitral stenosis, mitral regurgitation, whether it's primary or secondary. Pulmonary valve, if you ask pulmonary stenosis, we know that congenital pulmonary stenosis, we can do a balloon pulmonary valvoplasty that's very effective. But there are a lot of patients having pulmonary regurgitation, particularly in patients who had a congenital heart repair at very young age and later they present with pulmonary regurgitation. So these were the patients. And what about tricuspid valve, the forgotten valve? A lot of patients you see maybe having tricuspid regurgitations and you may not be having any idea to what to do about them. And definitely T. So these were the valves and the unmet need that really a lot of people are working on to complete this gap between need and treatment. So I'll just go case by case about discussing very relevant clinical scenarios in our practice. So case one, if you see a 77-year-old male with comorbidities in form of diabetes, hypertension, chronic pulmonary heart disease, and history of angioplasty, and he's having a class 3 NYHA dyspnea and also had a syncope. And on echocardiography, you can see that this patient was found to have a severe aortic stenosis, and his ejection fraction is just 45%. And STS score, which is a scoring system to estimate the risk of surgery. So it is 7.1%. So that if this patient goes for a aortic valve replacement in form of surgical aortic valve replacement, he will have a risk of dying of about 7.1%. So that is considered about intermediate risk to high risk. So what's the scenario of aortic stenosis? So aortic stenosis, if you see, is not a very rare disease in elderly population. By a rough estimate, it is accounts for it's prevalent in 4.6% patients of age more than or equal to 75 years. And the average mortality of surgical AVR is 3% to 8%. So even if a normal patient has a aortic stenosis and goes for a surgery, depending upon his risk profile, there are 3 to 8% chances that the patient may not make out of the hospital. He can die because of the surgery or post-surgical complications. And fortunately, unfortunately, surgical AVR has been historically and currently the most accepted treatment for aortic valve stenosis. But the question arises that despite this risk involved, do all these aortic stenosis patients have surgery? If you see that in reality, almost 30% of patients never get a surgery. So what happens if the patient is not given a surgery in form of surgical aortic valve replacement? If you see the natural history of aortic stenosis, till the patient is asymptomatic, the survival is good. But at the point where the patient becomes symptomatic, there is a very rapid downhill course and his survival reduces. So if you correlate the symptom with the survival, if the patient just has angina, he has an average survival of about 5 years. If a patient had a syncope, he has a survival of about 4 years. And if the patient is having a failure, is 22%. And these patients can die suddenly. So why do these patients don't get a surgical AVR? Definitely risk involved in surgery is one of the considerations. And a lot of times these risks may be very prohibitive, that they may be more than 8% or more than that. And a lot of times frailty, elderly age group, these things really make the decision making very critical, because you see a frail patient of severe AS and you think that whether this patient will make out of after a surgery or not. So at the one end, if you don't treat the patient is going to die. And on the other and you have a question that if I go for a treatment, there is also a chance to die. So what you do? So that was the reason that a lot of eligible patients who may be needing a treatment were not offered or didn't opt it for a treatment. For such a patient, what we can do is that we can give a transcatheter aortic valve implantation in form of what we call TAVI, and it can be easily done nowadays with transfemoral access. You put a access through, you cross the valve, and then you deploy this the TAVI valve, or V-TAVR, what we call. So this all started when with this revolution that Dr. Alan Trebier pioneered and published in 2002. And thereafter, if you see the current scenario, a lot of patients who were being denied of surgery or treatment are now going for TAVI and are having improvement in survival. So, and this has really went into the guidelines. So if you ask me which patients of AS, as per the current scenario and guidelines, are ideal for a TAVR instead of a surgical AVR, patients with moderate to high risk of having bad outcomes after surgery, or we call intermediate to high risk surgical risk patients, elderly patients, frail patients, all these are ideal candidates for going for a transcatheter aortic valve replacement, where the patient can just get admitted for 2-3 days, just 1 day of CCU care, and the patient can be discharged without any general anesthesia, without any operation on the chest wall, and this is why this treatment is very appealing. So this was how you manage today aortic stenosis patients who were denied a surgery, denied a treatment, and now they have an option in form of TAVI. And not only native valve disease, a lot of patients may come with a previously implanted bioprosthetic aortic valve, and these patients can also be managed through transcatheter aortic valve implantation, because you remember, such patients redo surgeries are always tricky. So in that scenario, you can see that here is the balloon expandable valve, the SAPIEN valve, which is being deployed at the aortic valve position. And this at times is very tricky, because two valves at the same site, the coronaries arise from here. So in this case, what we did, that we protected the coronary with a wire, and when we deployed the valve, we realized that maybe the coronaries may be getting impairment in blood flow. We put a stent there, and we could manage it well, and this was the result. So you treat the degenerated bioprosthetic aortic valve, you manage the coronary blood flow, this patient being very elderly, high risk, and this patient can walk out of the hospital in 2 to 3 days, and he can have a symptom-free survival, what we can wish for. So case 3. So a 64-year-old female, ischemic cardiomyopathy with LVF of 30%, moderate to severe MR. So what we do in such patients? Obviously, we have ruled out further revascularization. This is what her EF is going to be, because there is no viable myocardium left to vascularize. So what you do is that you optimize the medical therapy. This patient had a left bundle branch block. So as Dr. Vanita had really pointed in that in such patients, CRTD becomes a very good option. CRTD has also been given, but still the patient is having functional class 3 symptoms. So what hope we give this patient to? So we know that such patients we have spent all the treatment that's available in form of CRTD, revascularization. These patients, if they are symptomatic, they are going to have repeated admissions for heart failure and definitely a downhill course. So what treatment options we have? Palliative, treat the symptoms, hope for the best. We can give a left ventricular assist device, LVAD, that's an option definitely in such patients, but its cost is very, very prohibitive, or just wait and watch. So till 1 to 2 years back, for such patients, we didn't have much option, apart from the treatment options that I have mentioned here. So after this QAP trial, the MITRA-CLIP trial, basically this is a clip which clips the mitral valve and reduces the mitral regurgitation. So in this QAP trial, what was seen that in patients with LVF of about 20 to 50%, moderate to severe MR, NYHA class 2 to class 4 symptoms, doing this MITRA-CLIP over and above the standard treatment that we give, improve the outcome of the patient by reducing the hospitalization. The procedure was safe, and more remarkably, you can see that it reduced death from any cause, and that was very significant. So after this result of QAP trial for MITRA-CLIP, what we have here is a very interesting procedure. I'll just show you this animation of it. That what you do is that you go transseptally, you puncture the transseptal atrial septum, and this is the MITRA-CLIP here, and you go across the mitral valve, and you make sure that this is the regurgitation jet, you can see, and you make sure that you are perpendicular to the line of the tremesure, and you try to catch the leaflets, the anterior and the posterior leaflets, and then you clip it. So what you achieve here is that you narrow down the mitral orifice here and you create this double barrel appearance. If you're not satisfied, you can release the clip and you can redeploy the clip. And this procedure is done in cath lab under transesophageal echo-guidance. So it's a very controlled procedure, and you can really maneuver this clip to your advantage. And what it does is that it narrows down the mitral regurgitation, and over the time this organizes and it makes a tissue connection bridge between the leaflets, and you have a cure for a mitral regurgitation. So initially you had a regurgitation with the mitral clip, you don't have a regurgitation now. So this is a very promising treatment, and in such patients, as I discussed, this becomes a very hopeful option of reducing hospitalization and mortality. And you can use 2 to 3 clips in a patient like this. You can see this is a live case being done. The case being done. So you can. This is the clip. This is how it looks, and you go transeptally the esophageal guidance. And you deploy, one clip was deployed, it didn't work, second was deployed, it didn't seal the regurgitation. So in this case, 3 clips were deployed, and the patient's mitral regurgitation reduced, and such patients really do really remarkably on follow-up in terms of their symptomatic improvement. Case 4 scenario. So a patient who already had a bioprosthetic mitral valve now has presented with regurgitation as well as stenosis. So what can you do? As I said, redo surgery is very prohibitive. So in this case also, what we did here is that we went transeptally, we crossed the mitral valve, and there we deployed the same TAVI valve, the balloon expandable valve there, and you can really seal treat the valve here, and you can treat the mitral valve disease here right there without opening the surgery and without going for the risk for such. So this was my 4th case, and this is interesting treatment that has really just come up now. What about isolated TR? I think tricuspidation is one thing which is totally neglected in our clinical practice. One reason is that, and one most prominent reason is that we don't have any options to treat it. Just going for a tricuspid valve replacement itself is very challenging, and the surgeons know that it's very challenging, and the outcomes are also not so good. So this innovative TRIC valve has come. So what it hypothesizes is that if you reduce the redundant volume that's going back into the venous system, what you will do is that you will achieve a positive remodeling in the RV and RA, and it will improve the patient's symptoms as well as outcomes. And this has been shown in trial that if you deploy a valve in the SVC, a valve in the IVC, which we call it the 2 self-expanding biological valves, the bicaval valve system, and it can be done percutaneously without any general anesthesia requirement, and this can be done in the local anesthesia, and the tricuspid regurgitation can be, symptoms of tricuspid regurgitation can be really alleviated by this treatment. So patient selection is important because not all patients of tricuspid regurgitation is destined for that. The patient should have a NYHF more than 3 symptoms, EF should be more than 40%, his life expectancy should be more than 12 months, and there should not be any untreated left-sided valvular heart disease. So it doesn't mean that if somebody is having mitral regurgitation and a tricuspid regurgitation, you deploy this valve. First, you treat the mitral regurgitation. A lot of times, the tricuspid regurgitation may be treated by itself, and then you can go. The patient should not have a severe renal failure, or there should not be a liver cirrhosis. And you have to have measurements for the SVC and the IVC. And hemodynamically, what you want to see is that there is a significant regurgitation into IVC and SVC. The RV function, which is assessed by TAPSE, should be relatively preserved, and it should not be a very high pressure TR. That is, the pulmonary arterial systolic pressure should be less than equal to 65 mmHg. So this is the ideal patient. If it qualifies for by this patient selection criteria, we can give this patient this what we call a trick valve. I'll just run this image for you. Sorry, it's not the first one. So I'm sorry, I'll just go back again. Yeah. So actually, yeah. So this is playing now. You can see the first has been deployed, the SVC valve, and the second valve, you can see this is the hepatic vein entry into the IVC, and you have to make sure that you don't jail the hepatic vein here, and you deploy. This is the covered area of the valve. The valve is there, and this is the stented portion. So you make sure that the valve lies just above the entry of the SVC, so hepatic vein, and you finish the test. So my sixth case scenario is which we can do is that what about a patient of AF having high risk of stroke, chances of related to stroke in form of high CHA2DS2-VASc score, and at the same time contraindications for vitamin K antagonists and NOACs. So in those cases, what we can do is that we can do a transseptal access and deploy what we call as left atrial closure devices. So this is the real world scenario that we can offer the patient, and we can treat conditions of aortic stenosis, mitral valve disease, treatment for stroke prevention in patients of AF. We can treat tricuspid regurgitation without any open heart surgery and with effective results and backed by a lot of robust data. So if you see the future, there are a lot of valves coming up. Till the time we are just treating aortic stenosis in aortic valve with the percutaneous valve interventions, a lot of new valves are coming by which we can treat the aortic regurgitations also. And at the same time, apart from the MitraClip, which is available now, we have valves like Tendineee and other annuloplasty, which we expect that in the next 2-3 years we'll be having so much so that a lot of mitral valve, because native mitral valve disease is still uncharted domain for percutaneous intervention. We have this cardio band where you go transseptally and you put this band the way the surgeons put, and this is another what we call a Carillon mitral contour system. We go through the coronary sinus and you put it there, and what you do is that you just narrow down the annulus. And the Tendineee valve, which is recently has shown a very good result, you go transepically, and this fits at the mitral valve, and it has an anther which is there at the apex, or it can be in the mid-apical, and this holds the valve in position, and a lot of mitral valve, primary mitral valve diseases can be treated with this technology. So this was the future you can expect. So just to conclude, most of the intermediate and high-risk patients of severe AF patients can be treated with TAVI or TAVR is an ideal option. Carefully selected patients of mitral regurgitations and tricuspid have tricuspid regurgitation having percutaneous options in form of MitraClip and trick valve. Pulmonary valves I didn't discuss, but the pulmonary regurgitation can also be treated with the valves that are available at the moment. And if the prosthetic mitral valve failure, aortic mitral or mitral valve failure, or tricuspid valve failure can also be tackled by percutaneous valve intervention. And future evolutions are going on to tackle other complex scenarios like aortic regurgitations, native mitral valve diseases, and multiple diseases. And if you ask me what's the major limitation, I think the major limitation is the cost, because these treatments are really costly. And but over the time we can expect that with improving the technology and numbers, we can expect a reduction in cost of the treatment also. So this was from my side. Thank you very much for your patient hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek. I'd like to congratulate both the speakers on their excellent talk and for bringing us all this new information. and also like to open the house for any questions.
Dr. Anupama, can I ask a question to Dr. Pratik ma'am?
Yes, of course. So please go ahead.
Dr. Vanita, congratulations for a very short but lucid talk on conduction system pacing.
Thank you, sir.
With the arrival of so many other innovative methods of pacing now, like the Micra, the other leadless pacemakers, do you still think that conduction system pacing is the most physiological way of going about it?
Very good question, sir. I am really happy you asked this question. So, leadless pacemaker has its own place, and it is not the physiological pacing. You are going into the right ventricle septum, you are placing a capsule there, and you are having AV conduction. We have leadless AV Micra now. You have AV conduction in that, and this is around 80 to 85% patients that the AV conduction is maintained. Physiological pacing is the most important part of pacing, that it is doing the endocardium to epicardium pacing. It is actually the normal conduction system is being restored. There is nothing better than that. The normal system which God has given us, you are restoring that. So it is like, I call it like an electrical bypass of the patient. When we have coronary artery disease, we have blockages, we put the grafts distal to the block. This is exactly what we are doing in the electrical conduction system. There is a block in the electrical conduction system at the his bundle, at the left bundle. We are going distal to that block and we are putting the lead there. So this is the most physiological form of pacing. Leadless pacemaker has its position in patients, in different category of patients, where you have infection. You implanted a pacemaker, it's got infected, there is no site available, the patient has had past surgeries, the access problem is there because of shunts which have been made because of the dialysis that the patient is undergoing. So all these challenges lead on to an access problem, and there you can go ahead and put in a leadless pacemaker. But please don't look for, as of now, please don't look for physiological pacing with leadless pacemaker.
With the classical conduction system pacing that you use, is the procedure and the cost of the device cheaper as compared to leadless pacemakers?
Yes, sir. It is actually conduction system pacing requires technical skill. A very good technical skill is required, and the procedure is the same as conventional pacemaker except for the placement of RV lead. So from the conventional pacemaker, it is a little expensive. It's a difference of about 50 to 60,000 rupees from the conventional pacemaker. But from leadless pacemaker, it is very, very economical, because leadless pacemaker costs around 9.5 lakhs, while this conduction system pacing can be done in about 3 lakhs.
Ma'am, do you routinely do his bundle pacing now at Apollo?
Yes, sir. I am routinely doing it. In fact, and Vivek both have started this procedure in Apollo Hospital. Nobody was doing it before we came in, and we are doing. In fact, all pacemakers we are doing is with the conduction system pacing. Sir, very interestingly, earlier we just had one lead and one catheter to place this bundle lead, which was from Medtronic. But now it is the St. Jude as well as Biotronic has come with very good catheters for manipulation and placement of the lead, and we can use their conventional lead for conduction system pacing. So it is a very promising technique. Now we are having a very good hardware. It started in 2000, sir. Since then we have been working on it, but because of the lack of hardware, we were not able to do it as a routine procedure. But now we are able to do it as a routine procedure because we have so much of hardware available, so much of options available from all the companies, all the industry is supporting us.
And ma'am, your pet is angry because I am asking questions, or it is angry because you are not paying attention to your pet?
I'm so sorry, sir. Somebody's at the gate and he becomes mad at it. I'm sorry.
Okay. Ma'am, how much does his bundle pacing cost at your place?
Sir, the cost of his bundle pacing with the dual chamber pacemaker is around 2.7, 2.8.
You couldn't hear you, ma'am. Couldn't hear you.
2.7, 2.8.
Maybe some problem with my connection.
Yes, sir. Sir, it is conduction system
Okay,
pacing cost of 2.7, 2.78 lakhs. That's it.
Ma'am, now regarding you mentioned some of the conditions, where we require all these casings, and you mentioned one of the conditions as myocarditis. Now there are many types of myocarditis that we deal. I want to specifically ask you: did you have to deal with COVID myocarditis, and was there a chance that you faced some of these patients? COVID myocarditis, COVID-19 myocarditis, leading to conduction blocks.
Sir, we saw a lot of cases of COVID myocarditis presenting with the sinus node dysfunction, AV node dysfunction. Luckily speaking, sir, we just had to wait in these patients and they recovered back very nicely. Some of them persisted with sinus bradycardia, but there was no indication for pacemaker. I think there was only 2 patients that I paced who had COVID positive, who had AV conduction disease, and they presented with syncope. But they had underlying conduction system disease, which was precipitated. Now, whether COVID caused that precipitation or it was a spontaneous precipitation, I do not know. But if you talk of heart blocks and sick sinus syndrome, we saw a lot of cases. So we saw a lot of cases of sinus tachycardia also. I'm sure you all must have seen much more than me of sinus tachycardia presenting because of COVID, which has taken time to settle in patients. But AV conduction and sinus bradycardia, of course, recovered very nicely. That's what my experience has been. Rest, sir, you can.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you the next question on tachycardia, and tachycardia was really not only about 100 or 110. It was even up to the tune of anywhere between 130 and 150 also, and it persisted. Many of these patients we gave ivabradine, anti-anxiety medications, and they settled down with ivabradine. I wanted to ask you how long to give ivabradine in these patients who have persistent severe sinus tachycardia.
Sir, it is a very tricky question because I do not know the answer to it. I think as long as sinus tachycardia persists, we have to give 3 to 4 months should be the normal range. But I really do not have an exact answer to this. I have given patients for as long as 6 months, but then I withdrew and got their Holter test and ELR done. And they settled down very nicely. Some patients required a switch to the beta blockers because of their blood pressure being on a higher side. So I gave them beta blockers. But I think 3 to 4 months should do the thing. I would actually want your input on this, sir, because you people have seen much more such patients with sinus tachycardia with COVID.
Yeah. So these patients unfortunately do not settle even in 6 months at time, and we really have to continue. There are patients continuing even now after the terrible February-March 2021 wave. And also to add to the issue was the panic, which is still persisting in their mind. So they are not only on ivermectin, they are also on anti-anxiety medication. So these are complex issues. But thank you very much for answering all my questions. I would now ask questions to Dr. Vivek, and kindly stay because other people may ask you questions. Dr. Vivek, wonderful presentation on structural heart disease, and it is a news to me that you are doing all these procedures, including TAVI. My question is specifically on TAVI. One of the criticisms of the TAVI procedure has been that the valves that we use, the bioprosthetic valves, they are vulnerable to degeneration, spontaneous degeneration. What is your experience with these valves?
Sir, I think this is a very valid concern, and it is something which is very, I'll say that well placed, and I thankfully that you highlighted this issue. And in the recent ESC guideline that was really presented in 2021, what they have really also emphasized that we don't have data about long-term durability of these valves, but we have data that these valves last for more than 8 to 10 years. So what will happen after 8 to 10 years? Because as I said that this treatment started in 2002 and came into market in 2015-16. So we data in a real world scenario data that is lasting for 8 to 10 years only. We know that these last for 8 to 10 years. And what we know that hemodynamically these valves are better than the surgically implanted valves, because the annulus for the surgeons is they deploy the valve very much above the alveoli and aortic valve junction. But when we deploy very deep, and our annulus is a virtual annulus. So the data that we have is that the valve area that we achieve through transcatheter aortic valves are more, and so hemodynamically these valves are more physiological, and the effective orifice area that we achieve through these valves are more very adaptive and very promising. And one thing more, sir, these valves are made of the same tissue on which the surgically implanted bioprosthetic valves are made. So if you see, these valves are not for young patients whom we know that the survival is going to be more than 25 years. So that's why the cutoff that the guidelines for, if you say for Indian patients, it's not a valve for a patient who is less than 60 years. This is a valve for a patient who is 60 plus and having indications for aortic valve implantation and having moderate to high. And we know that these valves are as durable as the bioprosthetic surgically implanted valve. So this is the status today, sir.
I want to ask you if there is a case of spontaneous degeneration of a bioprosthetic valve, then can you put in another bioprosthetic valve?
I think that's very interesting, and actually it's possible. And we have reports of, in fact, 2-3 valves. Sometimes in complicated cases, there have been a very early degeneration, particularly in patients with CKD and other comorbidities. There have been reports that 2 or 3 valves have been deployed in 10 years duration. So it's very much possible. So, but that's not the ideal scenario, but it's possible that one can deploy another valve. And the only issue that's going to occur is that compromise of the coronary flows. Because you see, our annulus area is very limited, and we don't excise the native tissue there. What we do is that we just compress that thing and create a space for a valve, and we deploy the valve. So the native leaflets are already there. So if we deploy another tissue there, so we have redundant tissues around. So there are interesting techniques, like for example, the techniques that you lacerate the leaflets which is pre-existing, and this can really make feasible redeployment of another valve without compromising the coronary flow. So it's possible that there are a lot of people who recommend that why are we shying away from deploying aortic valve in form of TAVI in younger patients, when we can redeploy another valve in 10-15 years if the first valve is missed. But as for the current status is, it's very much possible to put another valve in a valve, which we call valve-in-valve TAVI. It's very much possible, and there are technologies that can really facilitate this.
Dr. Vivek, you also mentioned about a procedure called the Micra clip.
Yes.
I understand the Micra clip procedure. You have to go through the atrial septum, and then you have to access the mitral wall, isn't it?
Yes, sir, definitely. In the animation.
All right. And
hello.
How many clips can you put? Can you how many Micra clips can you put?
So you can put 2 to 3 at most, because when you clip the mitral valve, we have to measure the gradient across the mitral valve. So the more clips you put, you create artificial stenosis. So the cutoff is that if the residual area is less than 2 centimeters square, you don't put another clip. So you accept the result, whatever you have achieved. But if there is a possibility that you can put a clip, so whenever a clip is placed, you catch hold the lead clip, you measure the gradient. So if the gradient is more than 5 mm Hg, that means that you have reached the threshold. You don't have to go beyond that. So if the gradients of the mitral valve are less than 5, you can put another clip. So at most, you usually you don't have to deploy more than 2 to 3 clips. So at times there will be a possibility that with 2 clips you are not able to reduce the MR, but you have created an artificial mitral stenosis. So that's not recommended. For that scenario, you have to abandon the procedure. So this is the limitation of these clips, because you are creating artificial or iatrogenic mitral stenosis. So if the gradients are less than 5 mmHg, you are well and good. You can put another clip.
Dr. Vivek, one of the great advantages being postulated for the bioprosthetic valves is that you do not have to use anticoagulation or antiplatelets for a very long time. In fact, now there are some latest generation valves available where you can stop antiplatelets maybe even after 1 month or even after 3 months. So is that a great advantage with the bioprosthetic?
So this is definitely a very great advantage with TAVI valves, which are bioprosthetic valves. You don't have to give oral anticoagulation in the patient. If the patient is already receiving anticoagulation for another indication, for example, the patient may be having atrial fibrillation and requiring a NOAC. So in that scenario, you have to continue giving the NOAC. You don't have to add another antiplatelet or anticoagulant agent to the patient. So if the patient has no other indications for anticoagulation, you just have to give single antiplatelet. Earlier, we used to give dual antiplatelet for 1 to 3 months, but the latest guidelines recommend that you just have to give single antiplatelet after the procedure. And obviously, such high-risk patients have high risk of bleeding. So this is how you minimize the risk of another complications in terms of having inadvertent bleeds. So this is the advantage that TAVI offers.
Right. I want to know what has been the longest kind of duration for a TAVI valve which has been put in India. How long has it survived? I think the procedure is relatively new, maybe only a decade old in India, or not even that. How has been?
Okay, right. So for India, I'll say this procedure is.
I want you to revise the experience of the whole TAVI thing in India.
So for India, you say that this thing is.
What has been the experience?
So fortunately, the first TAVI valve was deployed in India only. In the very initial stages, in the trial cases, it was done in Fortis Hospital. Though the patient didn't survive the procedure at that time, because that time the device was bulky, it was very new. So that patient didn't survive, but the valve did well. Patient had other complications because of that. The patient couldn't survive. So if you ask me now, the TAVI is here for last 5-6 years, and this is the experience that we have. So 5 to 6 or 7, 8 years, this is the experience that we have in TAVI since TAVI valve has been approved by DCGI. So we have this much of experience here, and the experience is very encouraging. These valves do really well, and our follow-ups have been, if you ask me my experience, so I'll say for the last 3 years we have been doing this thing at Perfect Match. Now at Apollo we are doing this. So 3 years have been really good, and most of the patients are doing well. The valve degeneration is not much, and we have not seen any significant redo procedures in our bioprosthetic valves.
Now I understand there are, for the TAVI procedure, there are Indian valves also.
So for Indian valves, we have this valve from Merin Life Sciences. They come by MyValve, and this is a balloon expandable valve, and we can be proud of this valve because if you see the numbers in South America and Europe, they are really very much there, very competitive to the American valves in form of the Evolute R valve or the Sapien valve platform. So these valves are also good, and the results have been very encouraging. This valve, MyValve from Merin Life Sciences. And there are a lot of other companies, Indian companies also, like for example, Sajanand company, Sajanand Life Sciences, they are also coming up with a TAVI valve. So a lot of people are there, and we can expect that we can do this procedure in less than 10 lakhs in the next 2-3 years maybe.
What is the current cost of TAVI with the Indian valve and with the Edwards valve?
So with the Indian valve, it is around 50 lakhs. That includes the valve cost as well as the procedure charges. But the imported ones, the Medtronic and the Edwards Science valves, they cost around about 25 lakhs. So that's the cost.
Okay. Okay. My last question. My last question to you, Doctor. My last question to you, Dr. Vivek.
Yeah.
I think Dr. H.P. Singh is wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, please, sir.
Yes, I wanted.
Yeah, go, sir, go ahead. Please ask your question.
I'm waiting for last 30 minutes to ask the question.
Yeah, go ahead, sir, now. Please, now your turn.
Before asking question, I have a suggestion.
Yep.
Oh, yes, sir.
Only one question should be asked the person, everybody. Only one question. Not more than that.
You ask your,
Number one.
You ask your question
Number two,
now.
everybody finish the question. Then rest of the doctors should ask the question. Only one doctor can ask one question. No, I'm asking. But I have a suggestion. For last 30 minutes, I'm waiting for the question.
We have heard your suggestion. Sir, we have heard your suggestion. Kindly ask the question.
Okay. Right. Sir, my question is very simple. Pacing and valve replacement is very costly affair. Very costly affair. Salman scheme providing only 5 lakhs. The poor people of India, more than 70% in India, how can they afford it? Number one. Number two, is any scheme from your hospital, the balance amount of the payment you provide from the any scheme, any welfare scheme? What is your opinion? Hello?
Thank you, Dr. H.P. Singh, for the question. I appreciate that. Sir, the thing is that, first of all, once the patient has valve replacement and pacing is required, you are correct. Patient has to pay a lot because the valve is costly, then the pacing is costly. So it does add up to the cost. I agree with you. Unfortunately, there are no schemes available as such. which can help us because government is giving us the schemes for the Ayushman scheme has been given. It is not applicable in most of the hospitals in Delhi, especially the private hospitals. So I don't think so that can help the patient. The government has decided this figure of 5 lakh rupees based on their own criteria, on the input of many people. I would not be the right person to comment on it, but it is, they have their own thinking where the cost price which comes from the industry side has not been taken into consideration with the things that industry also has their say in this. They have to be asked and they have to be placed in a very balanced place to either be have a constant input of a kind of a capping they have to put on everything. Otherwise, the latest devices, the latest procedures, the latest even the valves we have been talking about, how will they come in picture and how will they benefit the patients who can afford it? So I do agree that cost is the challenge, but we don't have any scheme per se to help such patients. We do try to help it out by getting the maximum discounts for the eligible patients from the industry side as well as from the management side. But if you are saying that we are able to provide them free, no, we are not able to provide them free. That for that, the EWS category comes in there. They have to have the EWS card, which entitles them to the free care from the hospital.
You want to say that EWS patient cannot take any medical benefits or any sort of devices replacement cannot take from their hospital. Did you want to say?
Sir, EWS patient gets everything.
There are schemes. Those who are multinational companies.
I think, sir, you have not understood my answer. I have said EWS patient gets the entire benefit.
They have to provide 10% of their profit to the poor people. That is a government guidelines. 10% of the profit you have to give to the poor people. What you say? Just tell me. Under the capital of CSIR, you have to give 10% of the profit of your company to the poor patient.
I think
you are saying whatever I have
answer that question.
It is 5 lakh per year.
10% of the total profit. 10% of the profit.
Yeah, this is wrong.
हेलो सर, डॉक्टर पोदार साहब बोलिए.
I don't think so anything is mentioned that 10% profit has to be given. Nowhere.
What 10? Anupama?
Yes, sir.
Dr. Anupama?
Yes, I'm right here.
Dr. Anupama? I think it's time to summarize. I think
Yes.
I must thank both the speakers for a wonderful job, and I want to thank you for a wonderful job. I want you to summarize this webinar for us.
Right. As brilliantly presented by Dr. Vanita Arora, we know now that, pacing, which was conventionally being done, did cause a lot of dyssynchrony in the heart, and also sometimes was responsible for heart failure in the patients as well as arrhythmias. Now we have a newer modality, and Dr. Vanita is an experienced cardiologist who's doing this procedure. So for all your patients who need conduction pacing, please send them to Dr. Vanitha. And thank you, Dr. Vivek, for an excellent talk as well. So we know now that there is this excellent new procedure where you can do a transcatheter aortic valve replacement as well as other mitral valve, etc. So again, if your patient can afford the treatment and is eligible for the treatment, we now have experts who can give these newer modalities of treatment.